If you could let me know when we're live. There you go. Right, thank you all for coming here this evening to the meeting of the Employment Committee. I shall go through the agenda bit by bit. Announcements, it's being live streamed. Could you please turn your mobile phone off? I don't think we've got anybody who hasn't been here before, so I won't go through the evacuation procedure. Item 2, I believe we have apologies from Councillor Tracy Shepherd, who's being substituted by Councillor Jill Shepherd. Item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. Is everybody happy that I sign them as a true and accurate record? I see everybody nodding. Yep, so I shall sign those. Item 4, are there any declarations of interest that are not on the agenda? Councillor Shepherd?
Declarations of interest are on the website.
Thank you very much. Item 5, public consultation. Have we had any public speakers? I've been notified of none. So item 6, the HR metrics data. Could I invite Head of People and Culture, Ruth Bartlett, to move the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. So the HR metrics report is a standard report that comes to the committee just detailing some key statistical information for the HR service. Just a point to note that despite attempts to get some benchmarking data with neighbouring authorities, some of this data is not data that routinely is captured by HR, and some of it is unique to our service area. So not all HR departments have an EAP service, for example. But happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Does any member wish to speak or ask a question on the report? Councillor Mrs. Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Ruth. It's very useful to have this data. On section 5, recruitment and retention, I'm just curious, the staff turnover data, do we have any more detailed or drill down data on length of service, for example, just to indicate the level of turnover, i.e. are we retaining people for longer than a year, etc.? Thank you.
Yes, I can definitely provide the information by length of service. I don't have that data to hand at the moment, but obviously included in here would be all leavers apart from those noted for cheapy transfers and casuals. So that does include capability in terms of probation, leavers. So, but for the next report, I can provide that by length of service.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again for the report, Ruth. On paragraph 3.6, return to work interview compliance, this seems to be a measure of process performance, isn't it? We have a process in place, but it's not always been adhered to 100%. You've given us some information about particular areas that are perhaps the worst, but it would be useful if we could see a table perhaps of all departments and what the compliance is, so we can, it's interesting to know what's the worst, but we don't know how far distant of the next worst they are, if they're quite close to the average, or if they're some way distant, or equally, if areas are really performing and doing it well, you know, we can find what are they doing the others aren't, apart from obviously doing the interviews, what are the constraints that are causing, you know, the process failure, as it were. So it would be useful to have that. And then I know you said that it was difficult because to do comparator data with other councils on this, but I'm presuming that in things like absence, there is comparative data so that we can benchmark against the average for neighbouring councils, for example. Now, I appreciate that not all councils are equal, but if they all do waste management, for example, and waste management is a particular issue for absence across them all, we can see how we compare in an area that's perhaps more prone to musculoskeletal injuries compared to other councils, as opposed to just having isolated data for ourselves. Where that data exists for those sort of services, it would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to pick up on the return to work compliance, I do provide that monthly to the performance monitoring officer based on directorate, and that is, I can split that further down by team for definite. Just a note on the commentary on there is that, bearing in mind, I think it might be useful for councillors to see the number of return to works that relates to, because some of this, it might be 1 out of 2 they've not completed, which obviously gives them quite a high compliance rate. Because some service units do have more return to works to complete than others. And then on the absence benchmarking, generally other councils provide it year end, which is why it can be difficult to get it mid-year, but I'm certainly working on that.
Thank you. I think that's really important. Like you say, it's the numbers of interviews is really useful, because, as you say, 1 out of 2 is 50%, but it's 1 ultimately that hasn't been done, and it may well be a very good reason for that, and that's where the commentary comes in, that goes with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it is no surprise to me that transport and waste in the town's work that's done in the town centres is our highest. That's the workers that actually are out in rain, snow, hail, let's hope no snow, all weathers. So I'm not surprised that they're at the top. And they're quite hard jobs in terms of bin collections, etc. So I'm not surprised at that. What I am surprised is that mental health is at the top driver now. So I'm wondering what we're doing about that in terms of the mental health. Thank you.
Yes, of course. So mental health tends to be a long-term absence, so that obviously contributes to the number of days that people are off, so that drives it as an absence driver, if that makes sense. But in terms of support, we have the Employee Assistance Programme, which offers free counselling to employees. We've also implemented mental health first aiders, and we also have implemented a wellbeing action plan, which includes mental and physical health, that employees can fill in with their managers for triggers and signs, and then we can offer any support and build that towards employees as well.
Any other member? Councillor Green.
Following on from Councillor Shepherd, are you saying that you actually conduct wellbeing surveys, work-life balance surveys with employees before they get to the absence stage, so you can mitigate that and maybe offset some of their working requirements to prevent the absences?
Yes, so the wellbeing action plan aims to do that, to ask employees about their triggers for physical and mental wellbeing, and we can offer support there. The Employee Assistance Programme is there as a proactive source of support, so employees can access that anytime in crisis or not. And then in terms of general surveys, we do undertake wellbeing and staff surveys regularly. We did that most recently post-pandemic to see how people were feeling, which then implemented the mental health first aiders from that. So we try and take a proactive response. In terms of the mental health absence, it's probably worth noting that it's not necessarily work related. It can be home related or a combination of both, which obviously have their differences in dealing with them. So.
Thank you, Ruth. Any other member? Councillor Green.
On a different matter, just looking at the random drug testing results, they're detailed, but it doesn't say the results of the tests.
Okay, so we've undertaken 3 sets of random testing so far this year. We undertake 15 tests per random sample, if that makes sense. I can't go into detail about the actual outcome, but the most recent one, there were no positive results.
And just as I'm a new councillor, in the event of a random test being positive, would the council be looking to offer interventions of support, or would it be considered like a disciplinary action?
So we have alcohol and substance misuse policy, which first and foremost is there as a supportive policy if people want to come forward with a disclosure, and then they would be offered a support mechanism depending on the issues, of course. If, however, they test positive after a random test or with cause or post-incident and they haven't declared an issue, that is taken down the disciplinary route, and it depends on the circumstances. Each case is considered separately. There may be support, but there may be the full disciplinary process followed.
Yes, thank you for the clarification and thank you for the report.
Councillor Mrs. Tromans?
Thank you, Chair. Going back to recruitment and retention, obviously in the current climate, this is a very important issue, and we want to make sure that we are retaining the good people that we do have. However, should somebody be leaving the organisation, do we conduct exit interviews to examine the reasons why people are leaving? And if that does throw up information, what actions are taken to address the issues, please?
Okay, so we actually send out leaver questionnaires from HR. We found that with exit interviews, it's that the employees weren't as candid as potentially they could be. So we send a leavers questionnaire, which is not mandatory. They're completed by the person that might be leaving, and then they send that back to HR with the option to meet HR or their manager to discuss it in more detail. So we do capture a level of information.
Any other member wish to speak on this? Right. Councillor Shepherd.
Can I just come back to the mental health again, Ruth? In terms of now more of our workers are home-based, has that made the rise in the figures more or less?
I would say that the stats don't necessarily indicate a correlation between working from home and an increase in absence related to mental health. However, the survey data, clearly during the pandemic, people coped differently with mental health issues, and working from home for some people was a benefit, for others not so much so. I would say that now more people are starting to come back to the office more often, so that mitigates it slightly, but it's hard to say that it's purely down from working from home that there are mental health issues. I think there's a combination of factors at play.
Right, before I sort of move that we note the report, I think that just come back to Councillor Brown's point, which I think was a very good point, about getting a much more sort of detailed breakdown of some of these stats with a bit of the, like you say, Ruth, context data, because then that would allow us to sort of pinpoint the problem areas and see, because there might be some departments, like you say, where they're so small that it's not statistically significant, but there might be some teams where these things aren't happening or there are problems, and that would allow us to either potentially invite the manager in question to come in and talk to us, or send our head of HR to go and ask some questions to determine the truth. Because the way I see it is that the committee exists in part, if we have got problems in our workforce, we have to try and find out what they are. So and that would allow us to ask those questions and either help solve problems or effectively demand better performance. Would the committee be happy with that suggestion? Okay. In which case I shall move that we note the report. Are we all happy to do that? Yep. And I will move on to item 8. No, sorry, item 7. Ruth, would you like to move the report, please?
Okay, so this report deals with various HR policy documents that are due for review and therefore approval if the committee wish to do that. So the HR policies are subject to review every 3 years. Some are outside of those 3 years, and it was part of the work programme to bring those forward to the Employment Committee. So here we're dealing with the probation policy, redeployment policy, and then the local government pension scheme discretions policy statement. So in summary, the probation policy, it looks to clarify the current process, apply it to new employees and new starters only, and it clarifies the notice period for those employees within the probation period. The redeployment policy, again, it's an update and a review and clarification on certain points. And then the LGPS discretions policy statement is a requirement under the LGPS scheme. And we're looking to introduce a shared AVC scheme, which obviously the policy has been brought up to date to reflect that as well.
Thank you, Ruth. Before I open it for discussion, there's one thing I was going to ask, and it's my fault for not asking for it before the committee. Could we, and apologies if you've done this and it's just printed in black and white, include the sort of track changes as part of what we get, just so we can pick up on any sort of differences in the documents? And I should have asked for this before the committee, but I've thought of it now, so I might as well raise it now. Does any member wish to speak on the 3 policy documents in front of us? Do they have any comments? Questions? Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Chair. In the redeployment policy at paragraph 5.5, that's page 31, what we talk about trial period for training purposes to allow people to adapt to their new role. Did we consider putting some sort of requirement in there to state the amount of time that it's expected to take that somebody being redeployed would take to achieve competence, so that it's not never ending? And do we need to sort of build that in to the policy? I'm not suggesting we stick a mandatory date or a specific, one size fits all time, but that we have some sort of reference to what we consider to be reasonable amount of time in the policy, because I think we do need to be requiring of people to make their best efforts to come to competence within a set period of time, and we don't have people on training forever and always able to go back to say, well, I've been redeployed and I'm still training on this job. We all know that sometimes these things can stretch out. Thank you.
Okay, so the policy does talk about the criteria to be considered suitable for a role should you apply for it on redeployment. So there is a requirement that you should be matching to a certain extent the role. So the training, it is quite open in terms of reasonable in time and cost, and it very much depends on the role. Some in the past, for example, it's been that it's to pass a particular driving qualification or defensive driving for the role. And it's difficult to put a time on it because it depends on the training. But given that our probation policy is 6 months, and although probation wouldn't apply in this circumstance, I would say 6 months is probably reasonable if you're not going to meet it within 6 months. And you should be able to make that assessment at the time of appointment. If the training course is going to take 2 years, then clearly you're not going to be competent to do that job within a reasonable time frame. So I can certainly insert that into the policy.
Through you, Chair, but just perhaps something within a reasonable time frame to be agreed with the line manager.
Perhaps support that going in the policy if you want to include it, Ruth. Does any other member wish to speak on this this item, on any of the 3 policies we have? Take that as a resounding no then. They are fairly technocratic policies. The one question I had, Ruth, was in the probation review form on page 22 of the agenda 8 of the documents. You've got the question on council values. I was just curious, what weight is given to that? Because it seems to me that, and I know this will have been factored in as part of the appointments process, if you've got somebody who's very technically capable and works well but doesn't necessarily fit in with us, and I know that every organisation has a set of values to follow now. We have the EPIC values at my work, and I always forget what they stand for. How much weight is given to that? I was curious.
So this forms part of the wider remit of ensuring that our values are embedded into everything that we do. So ultimately the values will be used in terms of behavioural competencies. So them being aware of them and then actually acting to them in everything that they do, that will be an important part of the role, because it's about their behavioural competences, which then some of the other questions within the probation form in terms of aptitude for job and customer service and interaction with others, that all feeds into the values at the same time as well. So ultimately, if an employee is not exemplifying the values, it does become a disciplinary or conduct issue, depending on the severity, of course. But
Thank you, Ruth. Does anybody else wish to speak on the item? Going once, going twice, in which case I shall move from the chair that we accept the recommendation that the documents be approved. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Mrs Tromans. All those in favour? Thank you very much. So I will move on to item 8, which is the work programme, and we've included the backwards-looking work programme, I've noticed, so I think that may be an oversight. So I would suggest then that myself and the head of go away and prepare a draft work programme based on the policy documents coming up for renewal to present at committee next time, unless any member has anything they would like us to include, because we will have there'll always be the HR metrics data, there'll always be policies coming up for renewal, and we do need to, at some point, work on this people strategy, so we'll work out where to slot that into the agenda. Does anybody have any suggestions for that, or are they happy to accept that approach? I'll take silence as Councillor Brown.
Happy to for you to take that approach.
Okey-doke. In which case we'll move. I have no other items under item 9. Item 10, we need to exclude the public and press, so I will move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Brown. All those in favour? That's unanimous. So could we turn off the light?